Hello there. Very good evening and welcome to Let's Talk Politics. I'm your host, Eddie Layne. And of course, as usual, what we do on these programs is to talk with you, the citizens of this country, to enlighten you on the developments that are taking place and to respond and clarify and debunk the misinformation and lies coming from the opposition, the incompetent APNU AFC, which sits in opposition seats and have been making absolutely no meaningful contribution to the development of our country and to society. Matter of fact, they didn't make any positive contribution to the development of Guyana for the 5 years that he spent in office. On tonight's program, I am joined by no other than former Minister of Health, former Minister of Agriculture, and of course, he is currently an advisor to the Health Minister, Dr. Leslie Ramsammy, a veteran politician. Dr. Ramsamy, it's a pleasure to have you this evening with me to
Thank
talk.
you, Eddie, and good night, everyone.
Doc, I want to start from the perspective of um, some of the misinformation and the lies that are being peddled by the APNU AFC. Um, and this is nothing new to them. I keep making this point repeatedly whenever I'm on this program that the PNC has a legacy. The legacy of the PNC is one that is built on lies, misinformation, division, of course, racism, corruption, and incompetence. Those are the pillars on which they build their foundation. And when we look at them, and I keep repeating the point that the APNU, when you hear APNU AFC, is basically a rebranding of the PNC because all of the tactics and behaviors that you're seeing from these guys in parliament and outside of parliament are are the trademarks of the PNC. We hear them talking all sorts of things about the COVID cash grant, about COVID-19 itself and how the government is responding, and about a whole host of things. Your initial thoughts. It's been a while since we've had you on one of these political programs, so I'm going to give you a chance to give your initial thoughts.
Thank you, Eddie, and you're correct. The PNC has always had its politics and its idea of governance based on lies, misrepresentation, fabrication, and corruption. The difference between the old PNC and the one that we have today, the one that is in opposition today, one that is in parliament today, is that they are not trying to disguise the fact that their politics is based on fabrications and fake stories. A good example is, in fact, the cash grant um, that the PPP government is giving to the citizens of this country as COVID relief. The PNC and for me, the APNU AFC, the APNU AFC is just a name. It is, in fact, the PNC. When you take that cash grant, they were there when COVID came to this country in March. In fact, COVID entered this country on March 5th, 2020, 3 days after the people of this country overwhelmingly voted for Dr. Irfan Ali to be the president of this country and for the PPP to replace the APNU AFC slash PNC. We had already begun on the 5th of March when that person entered Guyana with COVID to see the PNC trying to thief an election. I have always used that word. It was an overt theft attempt. In all that time, as COVID began to take root in our country, as COVID began to spread in our country, they never thought of providing support to the people of this country. In fact, it was the PPP, which had still not been in government, that began to take face masks to the people of this country, distributing it all over to give the people some level of protection. It was the PPP that started to put food hampers together and take it out to the people. And the PPP did that whilst in opposition. Our president, our present president, as he was waiting to take leadership in this country, didn't wait until he was sworn in. He, in fact, established a task force whilst he was still waiting to take the reins of government. And one of the first things that the government did when it took control in August was to say, we will give the people of this country a cash grant as a COVID relief. They didn't do it, and now they turn around and say that the COVID relief was one that was intended for PPP to steal money. In fact, I heard Mr. Harman said today or yesterday that the PPP has taken $1.5 billion out of this cash grant and put it in their own pockets. But you notice every time he's asked what evidence he has, he always says, well, you will see. And so, yes, their governance and their idea of governance has always been based on telling lies. They ran a government with lies. They're in opposition, telling lies. Um, and so we should not be surprised by what they are doing. How many of us will forget that it took 5 months whilst they were trying to thief the election before we were able to put a testing mechanism in this place for COVID 19? When we took over, the PCR lab was barely functional. And today they are trying to say that they had COVID under control. In fact, what we are experiencing today, the spread across this country, was because in those early months, they did nothing and they allowed COVID to take root in our country. And once a virus like COVID 19 takes root, it becomes a very difficult task to stop it. We see this in Brazil, we see it in the United States. And so today, they have no excuse but to come and tell lies. So yes, Eddie, I think that what we see today is a party that has no excuse, a party that has no plan, a party that failed in government. And this version of the PNC not only totally rely on lies, they represent today the worst opposition that this country has ever seen.
Doc, and you touched on a couple of critical points, and you talk about what they represent. But what is also important for one to recognize is that the PNC, the APNU, AFC, whatever they call themselves, are in a leadership crisis. They're in a crisis. They're facing serious crisis when it comes to people with competence, intelligence, and the ability to reason. Because we see the display of many of them in the National Assembly, where they have not made, like I said, any meaningful contribution. Every time something of substance comes up in the National Assembly, what they do, they bang on the tables and they walk out. But importantly, you made a point about the lies and misinformation, and whenever they're asked and they're cornered and they're asked to produce evidence, they always claim, oh, we have the evidence, we will produce it. We heard it about the SOPs. When they were asked to produce the SOPs, they said, oh, we're keeping that for the opportune time, maybe for elections petition. Well, the elections petition is before the courts, and they have not yet produced their SOPs. They have not yet. They now raise the argument about, oh, we no longer, we have gone past SOPs. We are now dealing with SORs. So, and even the SORs are telling the truth because they're almost the same as the SOPs, save and except for minor numbers that could not change the course of the elections in any way. When Aubrey Norton claimed that the PPP somehow is anti-Afro Guyanese and that we're firing Afro Guyanese, we're taking away lands from Afro Guyanese, we're persecuting Afro Guyanese, and he was asked to produce the evidence. He said, I have the evidence, but I want the ERC to be reconstituted. The same ERC that they were working with all the time, all of a sudden he wants it to be reconstituted. The other day, Harman again was asked about evidence, and he beat around the bush, couldn't produce the evidence. When it comes to the cash grant, the same thing. So what they do, this is the nature, the irresponsible nature of the PNC. They are laced with irresponsibility. So they make statements, wild assertions, all sorts of claims, and when they're asked to defend those claims and to produce the evidence, they turn away and they say, we have it, but we'll produce it later. And that is the problem. That is the problem we have. We heard Harman talking about, and you made some very good points, Dr. Ramsammy. You talk about the response of the PPPC to the pandemic, even before we got into office. The only thing that they did significant with regards to that will appear as though there was a response to the COVID-19 pandemic is their attempt to say that they're setting up a COVID-19 hospital. But guess what? The main objective of that wasn't to set up a hospital, but was to steal money from the treasury, because we know all the corruption involved in that facility at Liliendal when they were there. When we went into office, what did we find? We found a shell. A building looks really nice on the outside, but there was absolutely no equipment inside that people could have used and that we could have put into to use to help the people who were infected by COVID-19. And that is what they did. As a matter of fact, they downplayed the numbers significantly. They were underreporting the COVID-19 infections in this country, all in an effort because they wanted to play politics. They wanted to play politics. They knew that they had to come out of office, so they were busy trying to give the impression that the numbers were low. So when the real numbers were reported by the PPP, then they started to play politics. Oh, we had it low. Look at the situation now. So they were a government of lies and misinformation, and they're an opposition, an incompetent opposition of lies and misinformation.
And the lies have gone down to what they did in 5 years. People will have to recognize that in 5 years in government, they did nothing new in this country. Not a single large, meaningful project was developed in those last 5 years. The Chedijagan International Airport had started back in 2013. People will remember they voted against the, the budget in 2013 2014. They inherited that project. It lasted for 5 years, and now we have to complete it without reducing the project sum, which was 150 million US dollars. They reduced the scope of work for the Cherjagan International Airport from new arrival and departure terminals. They reduced the scope to rehabilitate the old building. There's no parking lot, and something that people have not talked about is that the Cherijalan International Airport that was designed prior to 2015 also included a port health. There is no port health that was developed for this new airport. The PPP came back in power after 5 years, and we are now finishing off the Cherijagan International Airport. But we have now inherited a project that was downscaled. Let's take another example. The Sheriff Street bypass around the city to Mandela. It was started in 2014. The very work that the PPP had starting with building the drains and so on the side, that's what we came back to. That road had never ever for 5 years didn't move 1 foot. Now in a short while, before in fact Irfan Ali celebrate his first year in office, it is likely that that Sheriff Street Road is going to be commissioned. The Ogle bypass around the city to Eccles was a project conceptualized by the then housing minister Irfan Ali going back to 2012 2013. That project had begun the feasibility studies and so in 2013 2014. It didn't move 1 inch in 5 years. The PPP has come back and now that project is moving. The Eccles to Mandela Road, a third uh, roadway into the city or out of the city, is going to be commissioned sometime by the end of this year. All of these were projects we left on the books. But who will forget the Demerara River Bridge? Remember that the PPP had done the feasibility work already. And these are projects that we not only conceptualized and did feasibility work for, we also located and secured the funding for these projects. We had completed the feasibility study for the Demerara River Bridge. They abandoned that study, if you remember. And if there is a poster child for corruption, it is the Demerara Harbor Bridge. After abandoning the feasibility study that the PPP did, they then contracted another firm to do a feasibility study. Remember, they passed in the National Assembly a budget for that feasibility study of $168 million, but then they signed a contract for $145 million. And so there is now an accountability problem that we have. And, and the Procurement Commission, in fact, did a study of that procurement process. It was single source and identified that with many problems. That too was abandoned, as you recall. So we left the feasibility study. We came back, and that project is still in feasibility stage, but we have spent over $200 million. The PPP now is moving that project forward. So when you look back, what have they built? They built Durban Park. Durban Park, which now sits as a monstrosity to remind us of corruption, of people without vision. $1.6 billion. You notice they like this 1.6 billion because that's what they said they spent for the COVID hospital. And as you rightly said, they left it as a shell. It was, because whilst it looked nice on the outside, we had to go in there and do work. It wasn't like we just had to equip that building. We had to reconfigure the whole inside of that building for it to become functional. So, the question that the people of Guyana, not just PPP supporters, but particularly the supporters of the PNC should ask, what really did these guys do in 5 years? Because they spent a lot of money. I believe some $1.5 trillion in that 5 years, because their budgets were always bigger than any of the PPP project budgets before. But what did we get? We got the Durban Park thing, and yes, we got one roundabout, and yes, we got a couple of overpass that nobody seemed to use. Oh, and I should give them credit for one thing, because it's a party of arches. They like to build arches, and they build arches. But we spent $1.5 trillion in those 5 years. And one thing we should mention, if you take health, in those 5 years, shortages of medicine and medical supplies became chronic. In fact, when we took over, there was no medicine to give to any hospitals, but the bond was filled. The bond was filled with expired medicine. And we have shown the proof of almost $10 billion of expired medicine and supplies that has been either disposed of or that we have to dispose of now. And you will recall Mr. Harmon tried to defend the APNU, ASC, PNC by saying that's medicine that the PPP left there. But in fact, we have shown that those were medicine bought between 2016 and 2019. So this is their story. They lie, they fabricate explanations, but the fact is that they carry, like an albatross, the necklace of corruption. And so here is the
And
PPP. It's less than 1 year, and all these big projects are back for people to see. It's visible. You could see it, right? They didn't build any school. The schools they say they will build were example of corruption. Yara Cabra, $800 million, and I think 200 million given as uh, advance payment, and nothing was done there. And these are all the examples for people to see. So if you are a supporter or were a supporter of the PNC, I don't really have to persuade you. Just look and ask yourself, how come they were there and they couldn't do that? How many house lot they distributed? I know they built 100, what you call it, core houses that people refused to take. Remember, um, this is their achievement in less than 6 months. By December of 2020, less than 6 months after the PPP came, they did more for housing than that PNC government did for 5 years. And so if you're a PPP supporter, I ask you, ask yourself that question. And if you do
that,
and you objectively answer it, you will say, you know what? Those guys really betrayed us.
But Doc, if I want to start with my contribution here from very right where you stopped, and you spoke about the housing sector. Only Saturday night I mentioned when I spoke with the housing minister and I asked him, you know, where are we in terms of house lots since we took office? In 9 months, we have distributed 3,900 house lots. 3,900. I don't think they distributed maybe the 900 or they developed 900 while for the 5 years that they spent in office. You spoke about a number of projects, and let me spend, before I go to those projects, let me spend a little bit more time on housing with you. This is what we already delivered. We're not talking about new housing schemes. We are not talking about our promise of 50,000 house lots in the 5 years. And based on what I'm seeing, we're on course to reach that, maybe reach that target even before the end of the 5 years. Um, we're not talking about the infrastructure we're putting into housing schemes in terms of road, electricity, etc. in housing schemes that had nothing. So the housing program, and I made the point before that people need to understand when this government speak about a project, a program, or an initiative, it is not just the initiative on the face of it. The housing program is not just distribution of house lots. It is the opportunities that it creates. It is the employment opportunities when people have to build their houses. It is the business, the economic opportunities for hardware dealers, the guys with the sand trucks. It is the opportunity for people to have collateral, a house lot, a piece of land in their name that they can go to the banks and they can mortgage and be able to build a house or maybe set up a business or maybe buy a vehicle. It is the accompanying opportunities that the house lots create. And every other initiative that you look at across this government, you will see it is not just about the initiatives and programs and policies on their face. They have lots of benefits that are attached to them, lots of opportunities that they create. I want to touch briefly on you highlighted a number of projects. You spoke about the Sheriff Street project, which they they attempted to do. And what did it with Patterson do? Patterson remodeled the project, tried to take monies out of the project. Instead of doing the open drains, the concrete drains, Patterson was busy putting plastic tubes. It was exposed and he was forced to correct it. You spoke about the Demerara Harbor Bridge. Patterson dumped the feasibility study, took an unsolicited bid to cabinet, had it approved, totally ignoring the procurement laws, totally ignoring the procurement commission, totally ignoring the National Tender Board, and went and took monies from all over the place in his ministry, including the asphalt plant and other places. The feasibility study, which we up to now, to this day, we don't really know truly what is the cost of that study, but we know over $200 million was said to have been spent on it. Look at the airport. When you look at the airport, they were going to pay more for a smaller project. So they reduced the project that the PP government initiated and they increased the price. When you look at everything and even to the road, the bypass road, we remember Annette Ferguson doing feasibility studies and feasibility studies and feasibility studies because that is how they were pilfering the treasury. They were using these initiatives as slush funds to take money to enrich themselves. And I keep making the point over and over to PNC supporters, to APNU supporters, and to AFC supporters. When you look at all the projects that they were involved in, when you look at all the corruption that they were involved in, when you look at the ones who got rich, filthy rich over the last 5 years, you will see it is a small cabal of friends and family and businessmen who are willing to put monies in the pockets corruptly and illegally in the pockets of the PNC leaders, the APNU AFC leaders, the Brian Tewaris, the Hardat Singhs, the Lloyd Singhs, and the others who were busy enjoying the good life that Granger and his gang promised. This small group was enjoying the good life, while the people of this country were suffering. Many families all across this country, from the Quarantine Coast to the Essequibo Coast, Linden to Buxton to South Georgetown to Annandale to Lusignan, every part of this country could not say, many families could not say where their next meal will be coming from, how they will pay their rents. Many people lost their vehicles because they couldn't afford to pay the bank. Many people lost their homes because they couldn't afford to pay their mortgages. The banks were facing significant pressure. And what Harman and his gang and Granger and his gang was doing, they were busy taxing the life out of the people of this country as they steal from the treasury and they care absolutely nothing about anyone, including the people who supported them. So when they come to us and they cry and they try to give the impression that they are now the guardians of Afro Guyanese, ask them what have they done for Afro Guyanese. What you know what they did? They used Trevor Ben and Christopher Jones, for that matter, used Trevor Ben to throw out a poor Afro-Guyanese family in South Georgetown and took their land and gave it to him to build a barbershop. Well, we know the barbershop story. We know where the barbershop equipment was found, and we know there is no evidence to show. We know what happened with the SLED program, and this is the corruption of the cabal that I can point to. The SLED program where pig pens were being made, chicken pens were being made, the man who collect millions of dollars to look after the chicken pen is somewhere overseas. The man who's dealing with the pig project, you can't find one pig, not a piglet, but hundreds of millions of dollars could not be accounted for. That is the nature of the PNC. We saw it, we read about it, many of us young people, what they did to this country pre 1992, and we saw an example. So, a lot of young people who said, they had nothing to compare, you had 5 years of a corrupt, incompetent cabal, and you can see the difference. What the PPP has done in the last 9 months completely outdo what they did in 5 years.
I want to build on one point about the land. That not only did they take land like the ones you talking about barbershop and so, but I want to mention one specific one in Seafield in West Bobis. Under the PPP government, the citizens in Seafield who never voted for the PPP. These are areas that the PNC were guaranteed to get 98, 99, 100% of the vote. But the citizens of Seafield, because of the PPP, got leases for land at the back of their village. The first thing that the Granger led government did was to rescind all those leases. Never mind, those leases were for their supporters, and they returned the land to a handful of persons in a co op. So they took land from people. The same government that had no land to develop into housing schemes, but they had land to give themselves large acreage. Let us ask ourselves who owned the land where the oil refinery or Deepwater Harbor is supposed to be located, in Crab Island and behind Bohemian. See who are the people who got the land. Remember, they sold land on the Demerara River, where the bridge is supposed to go, and they sold the land to themselves for amounts that are really questionable. But those are things that we are exploring now and investigating. We have people in court right now because of corrupt land deal, but they didn't have any land to give to the people. They took land away. And for those who already had land, the farmers and so, who had leases, they increased the leases, not by 2% or 5%, sometimes as much as 100%, 200%. So the farmers in MMA, for example, had their lease and their drainage payment increase double. You will recall when they closed Wales Estate, they said, and Mr. Nagamutu as Prime Minister went there, and they had Mr. Ramjatan chairing some kind of task force. And they said they were going to give that land to the sugar workers. Did any sugar worker get an acre of land or a half acre or a quarter acre or just a little piece of land in Wales? No, none of them got. So, yes, they did give out some leases, but they give it out to themselves in large swaths. But they had no land to develop housing schemes and give house lots to people. They had no land to give to farmers, but they took away farmers' land. These are things we must remember. This is what they did in the 5 years. And therefore, it was no accident that they lost the election. And they had promised people that they would get land. They had promised people they would get housing, uh, house lots. They had promised people more jobs. They promised free university education. Remember how they promised that they will reduce VAT? And yes, they trick people because this is what they do. They're misrepresenting. They say we reduce VAT from 16% to 14%, remember? And they did this in their first budget. But what did they do? They increased what an ordinary family would have to pay on VAT. Because now they have to pay 14% on electricity, 14% on water, 14% on medicine, because a lot of the food items and so that were zero rated by the PPP became vatable. So whilst they reduced the rate from 16 to 14%, it was a trick, trying to trick the people that they had kept their promise. But they increased the basket of goods that you had to pay VAT on. So at the end of a week, at the end of a month, what you paid in VAT was far more than you paid before. Remember, you had to pay VAT now on computers, on data, all of these things that people had to pay VAT on. And so they collected by 2020 about 100 billion more in taxes, 200 different taxes. And this is a fundamental difference between the two parties. One make promises that they never keep, and one keep their promises. So they promised free education, it never happened. They promised more jobs, it never happened. They promised that they will run a lean and clean government. We, in fact, had a more corrupt government. We had a government that was spending more money. They they promised many things that they didn't deliver. They did promise the sugar workers 20% annual pay increase. They did promise the public servants that they will have big increases, but they gave themselves 100% increase. And then you remember Moses Nagamutu telling the public servants, well, we don't have all the money right now, So we give ourselves a pay increase and your turn will come. Well, 2020, they lost the government and they still had not increased the public servants' salary. The big increases that they had promised to the police officers, to the army officers, etc. And in fact, the bonus that the PPP used to give, they took it away. They promised the sugar workers 20%, they never gave them, but they promised the sugar workers one thing more. Remember, they promised that they would not close a single sugar estate. They closed the sugar estate. And instead of finding more jobs for people, 37,000 people lost their jobs during those 5 years. It was a government that had no conscience. It was a government that did not care. And so the question is, how did the PPP come in so quickly and remove all those 200 taxes? How did the PPP come in and reduce the number of items that are vatable? And yet the PPP is creating housing schemes. The PPP has started a process that we said in 5 years we will make the university education free. We are giving 20,000 online scholarships. We brought back the cash grant for children in school. Remember, they took that away from families. We brought it back. We have increased the pensioners of the pension whilst reducing taxes on the people. And yet we are spending more on entitlements to people. And we still have the difficulty of COVID-19. In every country, they are cutting back. We took a government, and even with COVID, we are managing the finances of this country in such a way that there are big projects creating jobs, changing the infrastructure of this country, but also giving people things. And so the fundamental difference, one make promises that they don't keep, and the PPP make promises that are contracts with our people. And you see that difference in just the 9 months that we have been in government. And I think that the PPP supporters know this. They will keep demanding more from our government, but that's what we taught them to do, right? To push us more and more and more. But I have a special message for my sisters and brothers, my comrades who have never voted for us and who have been loyal to the PNC. It's a good thing to be loyal. But there comes a time when we should ask ourselves that the people we put our faith in, the people we have given everything to, what have they done for us? And this is all I want people to do. Don't argue with me or with anybody. When you go to bed in the night, ask yourself, the people that I have been so loyal to, what have they done for me? And the government that I have always opposed, the PPP, they have always been doing things for us. And so when that young supporter of the PNC gets a scholarship from the PPP, whether it's online or the University of Guyana, or to go to Cuba to study medicine, or to China or some other country, remember that the PPP is keeping its promise that we will govern this country. The president said, I was there at the cultural center when he was sworn in, and he said that he will be the president not of the people who voted for him, but of all the people of this country. And every day that go by, I want the people of this country, whomever you vote for, ask yourself, Is this government trying to develop a country in which all of us have a piece of the pie? And you will see that every day. So the 20,000 scholarship isn't for PPP supporters, isn't for people who voted for the PPP. It is for all of the people. The jobs we are creating, what you said about the housing program creating jobs, the hotels that are being built in this country, the bridges that are being built in this country, the roads that are being built in this country, the factories that are being built is not for those people who voted for the PPP, but for everyone in this country. And so, whether it's a community street or working with a community recreation ground, or it's big highways or big bridges or schools or hospitals, already 3 new hospitals are being built. How come it couldn't be done in 5 years? How come we couldn't be talking about these big projects? And so
Because the
there is a
intentions, Doc,
reason why
the
PPP
intentions, Doc,
always win elections.
the intentions at that point, why it couldn't be done, because for the APNU AFC, it's about what's in it for us as individuals, as a government, their ministers, their cronies, this gang of hustlers. All they were concerned about is that when this project is being done, the one question at the back of their minds, what is in it for us? I want us to talk a little bit about the COVID-19 vaccination program, because I've seen a lot of misinformation, a lot of lies. But before we go to that, Doc, I quickly wanted to make the point to reinforce what you said, is that when one looks at what is happening in this country, clearly, absolutely clearly, you can see that the government has no interest in working for one group of people in this country. The government intends to work for everyone. And the president, I heard you mention comments from the president. I always remember the president making the statement at one of the outreaches that his interest, his priority, or his concern is not the politics of a community, but rather the welfare of that community. And that's a very strong statement. He's not concerned whether you vote who you voted for. He's concerned that when his government steps into a community, that the people are receiving the benefits that they so um, entitled to from a government. I want to also make the point, Doc, that when supporters of the APNU AFC look and see what is happening and have to make that decision with which you ask them to ponder on, clearly they will see that the gang that they had were concerned about their own little clique, as you call it, and had absolutely no concern about them. Because the very things you mentioned that are happening now, almost what, more than a year after our economy took a serious blow as a result of COVID 19. More than a year after. The country should have been in a worse shape now. 5 years after they have taken over a treasury that was full with money, and they squandered and they spend and they party and they celebrate with all of it, and almost left the country broke and borrowed hundreds of millions of dollars, we were able to come into office. And we were able, because you have a group of leaders in the PPP that are young, vibrant, experienced, a group of leaders, people with vision, people with understanding, and people who can identify the needs of citizens and fulfill them. We were able to do all the things you mentioned. I want to talk quickly, because we have maybe a few minutes more. I want us to talk about the COVID 19 pandemic. And I want us to talk about, some of the things that have been said, some of the things that are going on, and the lies and misinformation campaign with regards to the vaccine. You're hearing these guys are telling their supporters not to take it. There's a massive whisper campaign. And only recently we had to respond to one of the cases in Linden, where they were claiming people died. At least one individual died from taking the vaccine. I can tell you, let them point us to the evidence that people are getting sick or people are having serious effects as a result of the COVID-19 vaccination. I took the vaccine, and I'll be the first to admit that there were minor side effects. And what are the side effects? A little bit of pain in your skin, a little bit of pain, not pain that you can't move. Some people get a little bit of fever, like with any other vaccine. Any other vaccine, when you take the child to get a vaccine as a baby, they come home, they get pain, they get fever. But they're running a misinformation campaign when I believe many of the young probably have already taken the vaccine, protecting themselves, but they want to use you as political footballs, as political pawns, and encourage you not to take the vaccine because they're not concerned about your life.
Yes, Eddie. So let us be clear. It's not just Guyana, it's around the world. The vaccines represent the only way out of this pandemic. It's the only exit. Countries like America, countries in Europe, countries around the world are using the vaccine as their way out of the pandemic. They are vaccinating themselves out of the pandemic. And Guyanese ought to be proud, Guyanese ought to be proud of a government, of a president, a vice president, a prime minister, a minister of health, cabinet members who are working every day to secure enough vaccines for our people. There are 31 countries in the world that have not been able to obtain a single dose of vaccine. There are more than 50 countries in the world that have not been able to provide more than 5,000 doses of vaccine for their people. And yet, here is Guyana, that as we speak tonight, the Minister of Health this morning announced that there are just over 92,000 people that receive a first dose. By tonight, we will be approaching 100,000. If we don't reach it today, we will be near it. And early tomorrow, we will surpass 100,000 doses, first dose of vaccine. Our government has been able to work with other governments around the world, with manufacturers, to secure enough vaccine for between 260 and 300,000 people. And by July, we will ensure that between 260 and 300,000 people have received both a first and a second dose, which means, in terms of our adult population, we would already be vaccinating at 50% of that population. It's a massive achievement. And we need every Guyanese to get that vaccine. We need all of our leaders to speak with one voice. We are all in this boat together. And whilst politics give us many opportunities to disagree and debate, there are certain things that should never be matters that divide us. The vaccine is one because it offers protection against serious illness 100% of the time. And this is where we need to urge everyone to come forward and take this vaccine. I note this point, and I think you are alluding to it, that the president took his vaccine and has urged people around the country to take their vaccine. The vice president did the same. The prime minister did the same. The minister of health did the same. Other cabinet members, MPs from the government, other leaders have come out. Certain church leaders have come out. I want to thank the Archbishop, the Catholic Archbishop, for coming out. I want to thank those pastors and so that have been helping us. promote the message. I want to thank the pandits and the imams who have come out and been helping us. But I am a little disappointed that whilst leaders like the new leaders of the new political parties have taken their vaccine and have spoken about it and have urged our sisters and brothers to take their vaccine, that there are leaders from the opposition party, the APNU, ASC, PNC opposition, that have not said a word about the vaccine. I noted that they not only took their vaccine, but many of them personally called me. When you remember, we started out with 60-year-old and older, and then we moved to 40-year and older. There was an age eligibility for this vaccine. And during that restrictive period, many of these MPs from the opposition and leaders from the opposition party who may not be in parliament right now have called me and called the Minister of Health asking that we waive the eligibility for their relatives, their nieces and their nephews, and so on. But at the same time, as they were using their influence to get greater protection for their own families, they were engaged in a whisper campaign in the communities, many of which supported them over the years, that they don't take the vaccine. They tell people, for example, that the vaccine gets some kind of chip that will allow the government to spy on them. You think if they really believe that story that they would take the vaccine? If they really believe that we will spy on them, that they would have taken the vaccine? They tell people that the vaccine kill people. You mentioned the young lady that you know and I know. That young lady never took the vaccine. Yes, she died of COVID, but she never took the vaccine. The vaccine has not killed anyone. I know on Facebook people asking how many people have died because they believe this whisper campaign. I go in some parts of the country, Region 8, Region 10, where people are telling me that they heard that if you take this vaccine, you will turn into some animal. Well, I took it. I ain't turned into no animal. I know leaders of the PNC took it, all of them. You see any one of them turning into animals? You see any one of them got sick and died? So, as Guyanese people, we should use our common sense a little bit. Vaccines have saved many lives in this country for decades now. Eddie, your generation don't know what polio is. You have never seen polio. Generations after you don't know what it is. You know why? Because of vaccine. You don't know about mumps and measles. These are things you read about, but you have never seen them. Whooping cough and things like that because of vaccine. Today, I know you have young children, and many of the people listening here would have young children or grandchildren. Each of those children out there that is at least 1 or 2 years old already have 16 or 17 or 18 vaccines. And there are many of them, they're alive and healthy. You know why? Because of vaccine. We must not forget this fact that in 1990, 2,500 children under 5 used to die every year. We have brought that down to under 200. One of the reasons is vaccine protect them. And so I would hope that the hypocrisy will come to an end. I would want to see, I challenge tonight, and I know you join me. I challenge Mr. Granger tonight to come out. If you care about your supporters, if you care about the ordinary citizens of this country, come out tonight, or okay, come out tomorrow and say that you are urging the Guyanese sisters and brothers to go take their vaccine. To the opposition leader, earn that title, earn your place as a representative of the people that you said. I heard you say that you represent half the people of this country. Well, good. Talk to them. Tell them. Tell them tonight. Tell them tomorrow. Don't wait for beyond tomorrow. Tell them, go and take your vaccine. For Miss Lawrence and others, for the chief whip in Parliament, for Mr. Nagamutu, the former Prime Minister, who I know took his vaccine, for Mr. Kemraj Ramjatan, I challenge all of you. Come out tomorrow and tell the people why you took it and therefore why they must take it. If you have any ounce of decency, you wouldn't wait any longer. You will come out and say, I took my vaccine because I want to protect myself. I made sure my family took their vaccine because we want to be alive. We don't want COVID to send us to the ICU. Come out and tell the people you do the same. And to the people out there, whether these leaders come out or not, don't worry. You come out. And for those who say you are afraid of vaccine, let me ask you this. If you had to travel tomorrow to a country that require you to take yellow fever vaccine, tomorrow, bright and early, you will get up and run to the ministry to get your vaccine. You wouldn't be afraid because you want to get into that plane. Well, guess what? There is one journey you don't want to take, and that's the journey to the ICU and then to the mortuary. And there's one thing that will stop that from happening. It is the vaccine. And one last point, Eddie. Many countries are talking about making vaccine a requirement for entry into their country. So for my Guyanese sisters and brothers, the choice is stark. The choice is between life and death. If you choose life, you choose the vaccine. If you want to risk your life, then you choose not to take the vaccine. A government has made sure that vaccines are available. Come and get your vaccine. Come early tomorrow, wherever you live, and get your vaccine. We have sites all over the country. We even come in outreaches. Come out and get your vaccine, sisters and brothers. It is for your interest. It is for your family. Don't let leaders who have taken their own vaccine discourage you from taking a life-saving thing. Hi. Yeah. Yes.
Oh,
So,
oh,
Sister.
I'm sorry. I paused there now. Yes, I muted my mic. Sorry, sorry, guys. No, I was making the point, Dr. Ramsamy. I may do this because we have to wrap up. That as of today, around the world, 919,600,000 people took the vaccines. 12 million alone today. So if close to a billion people have been vaccinated and none of them died, we haven't seen any reports of a single death. Why are you, our brothers and sisters in this country, allowing allowing those in the PNC, in the opposition, to encourage you not to take the vaccine? Like you said, Doc, they themselves took it. They ensured that their relatives and friends took it. You, the people of this country, have to protect yourself. Clearly, see, they have no interest in helping you to protect yourself. I want to say what they're doing, and this is the nature of the PNC. What they're doing, they're simply trying to cast doubt. They're simply trying to pour cold water on the government's response to the COVID 19. They have done nothing while they were in office, absolutely nothing to help you. The government has a very, very uh, encompassing program to respond to this pandemic. We have enforcement, we put measures in place to ensure people are protected, and we went further now to vaccinate people. We have been one of the leaders, I believe, in the larger CARICOM countries when it comes to vaccination of citizens. I think we are close to about 90,000, if I'm correct, or maybe surpassed that already. And like you mentioned earlier, that we have enough vaccines, we will have enough vaccines for every adult in this country. So we've secured enough. So I want to say, I want to join with Dr. Ramsamy. I want to join with His Excellency and the government of Guyana to encourage citizens 18 years and older to get vaccinated. To get vaccinated. We have what? 270 plus thousand people, sorry, 270 plus people who died as a result of COVID in this country. But we don't have a single case of a person who died as a result of this vaccine. So you make the choice. Where are you safer? Are you safer taking the vaccine, or are you safer remaining the way you are to be infected? I want to end here, Dr. Ramsamy, and I want to thank you rather for being part of this program. It was a pleasure. And to our viewers, we want to say thanks for having us. We're going to be back with you tomorrow evening. Will be Michael Gordon, and I'll be back with you on Thursday.